First and foremost, let's just go over the safety again. The idea of safety that I brought up with the slips, same thing here, wear gloves. If they're the white glazes up here in front, they're all pretty safe. There's nothing in them other than something that might hurt. And there's caustic soda in this one, and it kind of makes your skin slough off, and if you have a hangnail, you'll feel it. These are the dark glazes over here. Try and keep them separated. And it's really for when you're mixing too, like you don't want to take a drill or a stick. There's mixing sticks right here in this bucket. The drill's right there, and there's a little extension cord. Make sure you unplug it when you're done. You don't want to take that and then move it to another glaze. You really never want to do that, period. You want to wash it before you use it in another glaze. But I know you, and I know me. And like if I'm in a white glaze and I'm moving over to another white glaze or a yellowish glaze, it's not going to really affect the glaze that much. So yeah, it cross-contaminates the glazes. So we want to be a little careful of that, all right? Okay, so I talked about mixing here. Now mixing with a stick, generally speaking, if you have a glaze that's been mixed with a drill already, and I'll cover that too, you can then just grab a stick, again a clean stick, and you can feel the bottom of the glaze. But you still, no matter what, if it's already been mixed up pretty well and there's no chunky stuff on the bottom, just using a stick is fine, okay? I'll put that bucket of sticks right here and stay in the center with some water in it, and they'll just be kind of rinsable there. This is what you do when you have a stick and you're gonna go then get it out of the way so you can glaze. You put the lid like there, you put the stick there, and that way you're not dripping glaze to get it over to the sink to go ahead and rinse that stick off to put it back in the bucket, okay? So I'm gonna mix this one first because there's a mnemonic device for you to think about, and it's only if you use this glaze. I said this once and then somebody put it on everything and then covered it up with another glaze because I think they thought I meant you have to gesso your canvas, you know, kind of thing. Like you have to put this on first, you don't. If you wanna use Shino though, you need to put Shino on before any other glaze. Do not put Shino over another glaze. As beginners, I'm going to limit you to only 2 glazes on one piece. Do not put 10 glazes on one piece because first of all, you won't know what you did. Second of all, it could cause a eutectic bond, which means it could melt earlier on than it should. The fluxes are the things that melt things in a glaze. And we'll talk about the basic formulation of a glaze in a minute here, but those fluxes kind of can act together and you can have problems. So mainly because of your thickness too. So I'm going to talk about thickness and other issues too. One of the things with these glazes, they're mixed at a specific amount of water. You can use a hydrometer to measure specific gravity. We're not doing that in the intro class. And if you advance and you want to like get really into glazing specific thickness of a glaze, you can measure the hydrometer measures a specific gravity, which means how much water is in it basically. But with these glazes, I try and keep them mixed. You keep the lids on, and that will be helpful with this rule. The rule is 1 to 2, maybe 3 seconds, no more. And that could be combined with, if you're thinking about using 2 glazes on a piece, then if you're going to dip half of it in one glaze and the other half, you can do 2 seconds on one half, let that dry, grab the other end when it's dry, dip it, the rest of it in the other glaze. Where they overlap might be 4 seconds though, right? That's okay. But if you're going to glaze a piece where you're going to dip it all in one glaze and then put this glaze over it, maybe you do 2 seconds and then maybe a quick dip of the other glaze, okay? So I'm just getting you to thickness, okay? It's not that critical. If you go 5 seconds, 6 seconds is kind of critical. If you drop it in the bucket, which I will still do once in a while, then you're like, then you know it's kind of a nightmare. You have to like wipe it off, scrape it off first with a metal scraper back into the glaze, and then wash it off, and you gotta let it dry for a whole day, okay? You gotta just let it dry, and then tomorrow you can glaze again because it's already saturated. So that idea of how thick you want it, that's really important. Another rule here, major rule, this is a major rule, and if you do not abide by this, your pieces will not get in the kiln. If it's too thick, they won't get in the kiln. If you have glaze on the bottom, this is the rule, no glaze on the bottom. And on top of that, no glaze, a pencil thickness from the bottom. Which means if you look at one of your cups that you made, if you have a foot on it, maybe the foot could be, if you trimmed a foot on your bowls, which you had to, you know, if you added a foot to the bottom of your hand-built cups, or you had a sculpture that had pieces on it that lifted it up, those elements could be unglazed elements, okay? And we're dealing with high fire here. When you deal with mid-range and low fire, you can glaze the bottoms, and it's a whole different world. Generally, we don't do that even with low fire. I want you to like think about that. The reason being, who knows the reason? What is glaze? Glues, yeah, it glues it to the kiln shelf. It's going to melt and turn into that glass, and it's going to stay. All right. The time it takes you to grind that shelf, that's why we don't load. We just don't load them. They're just not loaded, because you'll have like a half hour of grinding. Now you might still have to grind a shelf if you put your glaze on too thick and we didn't notice it, or we had a little problem. There's sometimes a little bit of grinding. We use kiln wash on the shelves, which is a refractory material made of alumina hydrate and kaolin, and it usually allows you to pop it off, but then you have this white gooey stuff on the bottom that you have to sand off or grind. All right, got two rules under there. Well, your first rule is wearing gloves, right? But so you kind of have three rules to abide by there. As we get into it, there's different ways to apply it now, okay? The application, obviously, if you have some brushes, there's some community brushes in that bucket over here. You can brush things on, and it's maybe 2 or 3 coats then. Like, think of one coat as a second, you know? You put it on, let it dry, put it on. Or you might want it really thin, and you just put it on, one coat. So you have a lot of slip wear, you might choose to brush it on. You may see some brush strokes in it then, right? Some glazes show brush strokes, some glazes don't. So this is a serendipity, something you will learn through when it's Christmas, Kwanzaa, Hanukkah, or whatever you celebrate. When we open the kiln, you get a present that you like, or socks, jocks, and chocolate, which is all good too, right? But anyway, thinking about like that thickness issue outside of dipping it, brushing maybe two coats, 3 coats. So that's an application method. In this class, we're not using the spray booth. I'll introduce that to you in intermediate if you take another class. But your other options now are to be able to dip it in there. If your piece is too big, which the parameters of your pieces, except for that assignment 1, should be big enough to fit in a bucket. If your piece is like a certain size and there's not enough glaze in the bucket, you can talk to me and we can see if I still have some Laffys to remix that glaze. I have some glazes that are this deep, some are this deep. So you might actually say, well, I gotta paint it on. So your application may not be the one you want, all right? So I don't need to cover how to brush things on, that's simple. But how to dip it, you can just dip it with your fingers. If you have glaze tongs, which there's a whole bunch over here, and you wash those and you put them back. You can take an object, whether it be a cup, and you can pinch it very carefully. If it's really thin, be careful because you could pierce through it with these. But you do want to hold it. This is where I drop things because sometimes I don't hold it strong enough, but I can hold this piece, okay? Now if I'm going to dip this all in one glaze, I can just go in there and then go out and let it drip over the glaze and turn it. There's glaze all over the bottom, right? So I brought up tape resist before, right? So you could tape off the bottom. We're not doing wax resist, that's another resist technique. We're doing tape resist in here if you want. As you advance, you can do wax resist, but the technique that I think is really great for the bottoms of your pieces is to take one of these round sponges. The thinner ones are really good. And you make sure it's moist. I already did that. And you put it over wherever you're working. Just put it right next to the bucket for this time. And when I dip it in there, I can then just put it on there and it will start to clean. It'll start to clean off the bottom, and then I have less cleaning to do once the thing dries, and I can use a sponge to wipe it off, okay? And then you just do it over here in the sink. The mystery glaze is what goes into the sink. That's why all quarter I'm like, don't use those sinks. I've seen people use that sink. Don't use these sinks. So if you do take another class, these sinks are for glaze. So we take all of that glaze so it doesn't go into a landfill, and we put it into this bucket called mystery glaze. And we don't have much in the sink, so this is just only this deep. What's in the bucket? It's a mystery. But I have a test tile from the last time, and I can show you the test tiles in a minute. Okay? So understanding how to dip it, simple. But what if I want a different glaze on the interior than the exterior? Then I can grab one of these little pitchers. These are the nicer ones. These work great too, but you know, somebody's using this one in this bucket already. You can take that. Even the time, by the way, that I've been talking, I probably should just make sure there's no water just on top of that glaze, and just kind of mix it a little, maybe with the pitcher. And it's kind of funny, it's counterintuitive, but I don't like the spout. I like the edge of it more. I drip less. So I can fill it up. If I'm too fast, it might come over. And I fill it up to the rim, and that's about it once you fill it. You know, it's about 2 seconds, 3 seconds, right? And now I have this glaze on the inside that isn't on the outside, okay? So then the next step is, instead of glaze tongs, I'm gonna just put this over here to wash it. Remember using the bucket lid to do that. The next step is to maybe let it dry a little before you glaze it the next one. Not too much longer, but make sure it's not tacky. And you'll see it change color, just like when your greenware turns to bone dry stuff, you'll see it kind of lose its color, okay? Especially if it's wet, don't just dip it in white now, okay? So that's what I'll do. Now, here's the cool thing, is the bottom is I'm not gonna have to sponge it or do anything, no tape resist. I can just grab it like this with 2 fingers, very carefully, and I can lower it in, and I can lower it up to about that pencil thickness, which would be like right here, right? And then I pull it out after that second or 2 seconds or 3 seconds, and then I just leave it there for about a minute above the bucket. I do this a little, so there's a little wetness on the lip that just rolls around the lip. And if I really don't want that wetness to drip down, I just hold it longer and then I start cramping up. But I wait till it's all dry and it looks like there's no drip, and then I flip it over and I put it on my board or on the table. And that's like a real quick way to do it, okay? So I'll do that with that. So let's talk about applications after it's glazed. There's so many ways to then take the other glaze that you might think, oh, I'll try this black glaze over this white glaze and see what happens. You can take little shapes of sponges and do like little shapes on it and see what happens. And a lot of times it goes like this because glaze moves, remember? So remember, glaze is glass, and in the kiln it is liquid and it's like stable, but sometimes it moves a little, which is why we do no glaze on the bottom and a 1/4 inch from the bottom, right? But you can start looking at cutting out things like that. You can also look at stencils that you could wrap around a piece, so you could cut through a piece of cardstock or paper even, it will last a little bit, and you can hold that on there and you can use a sponge to stencil on an image or a shape, okay? What else can you do? The simple thing is kind of brushwork. You can like do little stripes, you can do shapes, you can do words, but again, why do we use slip compared to glaze? Right, it doesn't melt, it stays where you put all that great slip work y'all did, that I remember some really cool line work. That line work will be there, okay? Whereas if you do, like, if I take this brush and I write blah, 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 blah on the outside, it might just go, and it could be cool, because it could hold the word enough to read it and get obscured to a certain point where it's visually pleasing, but also could just look like a blob. So each glaze is different, and that's part of the learning curve. It's kind of fun to see what does work, okay? So if we have done a lot of slip work and we really want to see that slip work come through, the best glazes are clear and celadon for that. A really quick dip of Shino could also work. You could even do a dip in water, and just run out of water really quickly, and then dip it in Shino, and you get a really thin application of Shino. And that can be a nice effect over some of your slip work too, okay? So we have all these different ways to look at application and why we might do it this way or that way. What if we have slip work we don't like? I don't like what I did to this, but I still like this cup. Then we could go, hey, I'm gonna take one of these glazes and I'm gonna tell you the basics. So I'm gonna raise my voice so Nikki can hear me over there. So, Rita, can you hear me, Rita? Rita? I just wanna see if you hear this. So, transparent, translucent, and opaque. Did you hear those three things?
Yes.
So those, I just wanted to make sure you got that. So transparent, translucent, and opaque, if you don't like the slip work, that's maybe you use an opaque glaze. The test tiles kind of show you that a little bit. There's some over there that have slip on them. There's not a lot of glazes that will really cover it. Temboku is one of them that does. Sometimes Temboku reacts weird to a lot of oxide under it. So if you have a slip with a lot of oxide, like that black slip, it might do something funky. So, but you might want to then think about these animals that I'm talking about. One's transparent, one's translucent, one's opaque. Which one suits the piece that you have? I like to bring up thickness of glaze. We call a fat glaze a glaze that's really thick. A thin glaze is thin. And so the fat glazes are probably good on a surface where it's a little lunky, a little chunky, a little, crafted in a certain way that you don't really like the little blobs of clay that you wish you would have wiped off, sledded over, or whatever technique that eventually you learn how to hone that piece up, and use a fat glaze. The celadon's a really nice thin glaze, which will show everything. If I have a lot of carving on a piece, I like the celadon. And that's a quick dip, like 2 seconds in the celadon, and it's gonna highlight those carvings, okay?
Like the shop clear.
The shop clear is a great one also. It's kind of a celadon-y glaze, but it's a clear.
Which bucket is it?
The celadon's labeled celadon, the clear is over here. The celadon has some iron oxide in it, so I keep that over on the dark side of the table. Darth Vader's side, Luke Skywalker's side. Although Luke went dark too. But anyway, so but use your head and figure out what you want to use on your piece. This is a learning process, and in the glazing, you're going to get some, like I said, socks. You can get nice socks. I like socks for Christmas, by the way. I'm not asking for socks, but I think that there's some things that may seem boring to you, but you live with those for a while and drink coffee out of that for a while, and you go, I kind of like this boring cup. It's really, I don't want this cup with tons of color on it in the morning. And it's all up to you, how you enjoy your coffee, whatever, your tea, or whatever you're drinking in the morning, So your learning curve on this is one of the things I like to say, and I see, a third of the students do this, is to write down what you put on each piece. So when it comes out of the kiln, you can go, I did this. I'm not going to do that again because that is ugly. And I might go, wow, that's beautiful. And you're like, oh, I think it's ugly. So again, whatever you want out of your work, right? But then the best part is, oh, I really love this. And the worst part of that is, I didn't write it down. So you can't repeat it. So it's science, right? You want to write down what you're doing. It's simple. you do a quick sketch of that piece that you're going to glaze, a little chicken scratch, or you label it cup, and I did this. And you get it out of the kiln and you can repeat that. That's kind of cool. Doesn't really help you too much at the end of the quarter here. If we had the kilns up and running and we had a glazed kiln out by now, it would really have helped you, right? Sorry about that, beyond my control. But now they're going, and it's really helpful if you take another class, or if you save your favorite pieces for the last glaze firing, which will be next week. I'll say, okay, everything has to be glazed, or it's not getting fired, period. So that will be helpful, so you can think about that in terms of taking notes. We're going to load a glaze kiln today, try and fire it tomorrow. It all depends on if it's full. So that's the simple of it, as far as application, what the glazes are, as far as the animals go. But basically what's in a glaze is that thing I said. One of them is flux. Flux is going to melt things. Another thing is a refractory material that's going to help it not melt too much. What do you think a refractory material in a glaze could be? One thing. The clay itself. So there's clay in a lot of glazes. And then there's also glass formers. So what do you think a glass former is? You've all walked on the beach. Sand, like silica, some kind of silica source to make the glass. So those three melt it, and then what do you think colors it from your slip lecture? What are the colorants in a slip? The same in the glaze. Yeah, iron is one. Cobalt's another. Cobalt's blue. Iron's brown. Could go yellow. Could go blue. Iron could also go blue. So with some titanium. Anyway, so if we start looking at like different titanium, cobalt, copper, chrome, zinc, tin and copper together make a red if it's reduced. So different alchemy kind of works into it in the colorant. So that's why these glazes are pretty safe. There's no real colorant in them. Where you're wearing gloves, where you should wear gloves for all your glazes until you really know them, where you're wearing gloves, is because you don't want any soluble metallic oxides. I mean, I've talked about iron, yeah, we all maybe need a little more iron in our system, but there's a lot of metallic oxides that we don't even use anymore, like lead, yeah, right. So there's all these metallics that are just unsafe, even once they're fired, okay? So one question comes up, is this stuff food safe? Try and keep all food safe glazes for you. If you get into sculpture, you can play with other glazes that maybe not food safe. But anytime you're leery of it, you put a clear or white glaze on the interior 99% of the time. In here, it's always going to be safe, food safe. Another question that came up is this microwave safe or dishwasher safe? And when I get into the glazing, I'm going to say it's all safe in the dishwasher and the microwave, but you have a heavy-duty oxide glaze, and it's like putting metal in the microwave. Back in the day, you couldn't do that. You can find microwaves now that you put metal in. I don't understand how that works now, but you'll find like one with a lot of Temmaku on it, it might heat up quicker because there's metal in it. All right, so let's talk about tests now. Any questions about the basics of application, what a glaze is? It was thorough enough? Should I be more thorough or less thorough? I brought out some examples of, just hold it up. This is a Shino with some oxide over it. This is a Shino with some oxide over it, and then wax resist, which you're not doing, and then it dipped in another glaze. Oh, pass those around. This is a Selena with black slip under it. This is just another test. And so those are some good examples of the basics. This is, you can see it in the camera here. So I'll send this one around. This is Shino. and you can try this with other glazes that are more white with some of that cobalt oxide wash that's up there. So is this one, and then the brown on that one is the iron oxide wash. So remember Raven talked about that? She asked something about that. And I was like, yeah, that's when we get to this point. So that's what I'm talking about now. It's like that oxide that you did on assignment 1, instead of under, you can do a little brushwork over Chino or another glaze, white glaze or some other glaze. Sometimes it's nice to do it even over Temaku, but those oxides don't work really much over Temaku. So there's overglazes and underglazes. You already know slips as underglazes, and now we're just bringing this idea of brushwork on those test tiles, and they're over there on the wall. And they're also on that table, and you can look at the more recent ones are usually on the table. They're really similar to the ones on the wall, but it's just whatever's in the bucket at that time. And you could see that I put slip on those. And I'll grab one. This, yeah, hand that one around, that's Celadon. So I grabbed these because on the back, you can see how this one's almost opaque and it covered up what this one didn't. This is the clear with a red underglaze by Amico and a blue oxide slip, and then a white slip here. And then on the front of these is a black line and a black line. And that black line bled through this a little. So not all slips are created